So Clarissa and I will now give you the tools to think about how to design this kind of teaching. Because we've sort of been experiencing it, we've done it, because we've put you into groups and we've thought about things in groups, discussed things, and done these maps and so forth. But here, now, are the actual tools to develop a class like this. And there's actually a series of steps, 4 steps, that we'll review today. And remember, the goal of the workshop is in 4 days to have an actual module on Thursday, to present a module. Each group will develop a short teaching module, a short session, and present it to the other groups. And so this is the first lecture, the discussion, first session that will discuss how to do this. So to start, let's think about this question. How do we assess learning? How do we evaluate whether our students have learned or our colleagues have learned? So just think a little bit to yourselves and let's have a couple of comments. Just raise your hand. We're a little bit short, so we're going to keep moving and not take too much time. But how do you show how do we evaluate whether someone has learned something?
By their examination.
Examination, sure. Not a difficult question. Any other ideas? Any other thoughts? Besides exams. And we touched on it a little bit in how people learn in the previous discussion. So I think it was you, actually.
Mutual discussion.
Mutual discussion, mutual teaching.
Oh,
Yeah. So in this whole session, we will be able to distinguish a learning goal from a learning objective. These are very formal terms that have very careful and considered definitions. We'll use what we call backwards design to be sure that the objectives, the goals and the objectives line up with the assessments, as you say, the exams. We'll analyze different kinds of exam questions, what different kinds of questions are and how they can imagine how they can test different levels of learning. And we'll distinguish 2 kinds of assessment, summative and formative. Now these terms are educational terms, so right now they don't mean anything, but they will be part of your entire vocabulary and you'll never forget them by the end of this week. They're educational terms though, so they're a little odd at first. Okay. So, standard course planning. This is what I did for many years. This is what probably many of you did for years, and what all of you probably have been doing for years, little exceptions of course. You choose a textbook. You know, I choose a textbook, somebody gives me a textbook. You know, the ministry says you have to use this textbook. You think, okay, what should we do? And you write a syllabus. And then you think about your lectures and you make notes for the syllabus. And then we prepare the lecture, the PowerPoint, and we have 100 slides or 200 slides, you know, 1,000,000 slides. And then we write the exams, sort of at the end, often the night before the test, right? I mean, I did this for 35 years. Each of these steps, you can see, is focused on the instructor. I chose the textbook, I wrote the syllabus, I wrote the lectures, I prepared the PowerPoint, and I wrote the exams. The student, the learner, has no input. Not only does the student have no input, I don't even care what the student thinks or whether the student's learning. I just put it out there and wait for them to take the test. And if I'm a very, very good lecturer, perhaps I'll have most people doing well, but never everyone. This, what we call backward design, is centered on the learner, not the instructor. The first step is to think about what you want your overall goals to be for your class, for your course. Lofty, large concepts. And one way to think about this is, a trick to think about this is, after your class and the experience that your students have with you, a year later, on the street, if someone says, how do antibiotics work? They'll know the answer. Or, how do balls, you know, just the question, we expect students to be able to answer the question about deceleration and acceleration and velocity that we just thought about. A year later, no study. Once the goals are established, then you need objectives. What are the specific objectives for your class? Then you write the exam questions. You find out the summative assessments, the summation, the sort of final accumulation of knowledge, and you test it with exams. And only then, at the very end, when the goals and the objectives and the summative assessments have been made, do you think about how you will instruct. And the order of these 4 steps is extremely important in keeping your teaching learner-centered. So today, in group work, and after lunch, each table, each group will be designing general goals and specific objectives for your 5 topics. Later in the week, Monday and Tuesday, so tomorrow and the next day, you'll be designing your summative assessments. And then eventually, secondly, after the summative assessments, you'll figure out what can you do in the classroom that will allow the students to be able to answer your exams. How much practice will it take? How much demonstration? How much discussion? Not lecturing. So right now, let's think about general goals and measurable objectives. So what are the institute goals? So one way that we can describe the overall goals of our institute of this week is to understand important concepts of responsible conduct of research, to appreciate the potential of dual-use technology to be used for harmful purposes, to learn new techniques to deliver content about responsible conduct of research. That's what we're doing now in this session. And appreciate that learners come to the classroom with different backgrounds and experiences that impact their learning. So these are lofty goals, and you can see from the words that we've underlined: understand, appreciate, learn. These are not measurable actions. These are ideas and concepts. So goals are not usually measurable. Appreciate, think critically, understand, learn. Objectives, on the other hand, are measurable and specific. So use techniques to do X, Y, or Z. Graph the results of a certain body of data. Design an experiment. So here's an example. To understand, here's a goal, is to understand the important concepts of responsible conduct of science. Objectives for that goal would be to recognize the ethical issues that arise within contemporary scientific enterprise, and analyze case studies and identify misconduct with scientific practice. That's exactly what we did this morning. Right? Our goal was to think about was to understand the important large concepts in responsible conduct of science. And what we can now do, because of the Korean stem cell case study, is we can recognize ethical issues, and we know how to analyze case studies. So for each of the sessions throughout the Institute from now on, we will provide goals and objectives at the beginning and the end of every session. So just talk amongst your tables. What do you think this actually does for the learning process? How does framing each session with goals and objectives and then revisiting them at the end, how does that affect what happens during the course of the discussion of the class? Okay. And the way we'll do this is using a technique of active learning, which is called think, pair, share. We've sort of done this informally, but now we're giving it a formal name, think, pair, share. And an advantage of think, pair, share is if you have a class of 500 people and you want them to talk about things and analyze things and exchange information, you just pair people up. So in a class of 500, you have 250 pairs of people thinking. But it's a very specific technique because first you think. So each of us will think quietly for 30 seconds. This is very good for students, make them think first. And then turn to your neighbor and talk back and forth and compare what you came up with, compare your personal answers. And then I'll call on each table and ask for one example.
Question which is not clear. Shall each table during doing this exercise focus on their topic only? So we are about authorship only, or
no? The very specific question is, what do providing objectives at the beginning, this is a pedagogical question. So we've talked about goals and objectives. What does providing the objectives in the beginning of the session do to help learning? That's it. So it's a pedagogical question. So think for 30 seconds, discuss for 1 minute, and I'll call on various people around.